The 10 plagues of Egypt get treated in most retellings as a sequence of impressive supernatural events. Frogs, locusts, darkness, big stuff. But the Bible itself in Exodus 12:12 says something most modern readings completely overlook. God declares, "On all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments." That's not a side comment. That's the thesis statement of the entire operation. The plagues weren't just demonstrations of power, they were a coordinated strike with each individual plague aimed at a specific Egyptian deity, dismantling the spiritual architecture of the most powerful empire on earth, one god at a time. And once you map which god was being attacked at each step, the entire Exodus narrative stops looking like 10 separate miracles and starts looking like one carefully designed theological argument. The Egyptians had a god for everything. Yahweh, in 10 moves, methodically proved that none of them could stop him. Here's how it actually breaks down. This isn't speculative theology. Exodus 12:12 and Numbers 33:4 both explicitly state that the plagues were judgments on Egyptian gods. What rabbinic tradition and modern Egyptological scholarship, notably John Currid in Ancient Egypt and the Old Testament, have done is identify the specific deities most plausibly targeted at each step. Some correspondences are clearer than others, but the overall architecture is consistent enough to be worth walking through. The first plague hits the Nile, Exodus 7:20. Moses strikes the water and the Nile turns to blood. This isn't random. The Nile wasn't just a river to Egyptians, it was a god. Hapi was the Egyptian deity of the Nile's annual inundation, the agricultural lifeline of the entire civilization. Without the Nile's flood, there was no Egypt. Hapi was depicted as a corpulent figure with lotus plants, symbolizing abundance and fertility. Yahweh's opening move was to corrupt the literal body of Hapi. The water that sustained life became death. Egyptian magicians could replicate it, Exodus 7:22, but couldn't undo it. The Egyptians had to dig along the river for drinkable water for 7 days. The Nile god was visibly powerless. The second plague targets Heket, the frog-headed Egyptian goddess of fertility, midwifery and childbirth. Egyptian women historically wore frog amulets during labour for protection. So when Exodus 8 records frogs swarming out of the Nile in such overwhelming numbers that they invaded homes, beds, ovens and kneading bowls, this was a direct overload of Heket's domain. Her sacred animal was now a national infestation. The very symbol of life and birth became a plague, and when the frogs died, the text records that the land stank. Exodus 8:14. Heket's icon piled in rotting heaps across Egypt. The third plague is announced without warning, and it changes the tone. Moses strikes the dust of the ground and the dust becomes gnats or lice. The Hebrew kinim means a small biting insect. Geb, in Egyptian theology, was the god of the earth itself. The soil was considered his body. So when the dust of Geb's domain began biting both man and beast, the magicians couldn't replicate it. And Exodus 8:19 records their direct admission, "This is the finger of God." That phrase is the first crack in the Egyptian magical establishment. Their craft has a ceiling, but once the magicians broke, the plagues took a sharper turn. The next set of 3 didn't just escalate damage, they introduced an explicit boundary between Israel and Egypt, and the deities being targeted moved from peripheral to central. The fourth plague is harder to pin to a single deity, partly because the Hebrew word arov is itself debated. It can mean flies, mixed swarms, or biting insects more broadly. The most commonly cited target is Khepri, the scarab beetle god of creation, often depicted with an insect head. Egyptian religion connected several gods to specific insects. What's clearer is what changes structurally. Exodus 8:22 introduces the first explicit distinction between Goshen, where Israel lived, and the rest of Egypt. The swarms hit Egypt and skipped Israel. The plague was becoming personal. The fifth plague kills Egyptian livestock: horses, donkeys, camels, herds, and flocks. The Israelite livestock is untouched. Exodus 9:6-7. The deities here are Hathor, the cow-headed goddess of motherhood and love, and Apis, The sacred bull god worshipped as a literal living animal in Memphis. Cattle weren't just economic assets in Egypt, they were religious icons. The Apis bull was specifically considered a manifestation of the god Ptah. So when Egyptian cattle died en masse and Israelite cattle didn't, the gods of fertility, motherhood, and divine animal kingship were being publicly humiliated. The animals that physically embodied the gods were the ones that died. The sixth plague is ash thrown into the air that becomes boils on every Egyptian. The notable detail is in Exodus 9:11. Even the magicians couldn't stand before Moses because of the boils. They're physically incapacitated. The targets here are multiple healing deities: Isis, goddess of medicine and protection; Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess associated with both disease and healing; and Imhotep, the historical physician later deified as a god of medicine. Egypt had several deities whose specific job was to prevent and cure exactly this kind of affliction. None of them helped. The priests, who normally functioned as intermediaries to these gods, were themselves covered in sores. The medical pantheon of the most advanced civilization on Earth couldn't treat a single outbreak. 3 plagues remain, and these are the ones where the Egyptian pantheon's heaviest hitters get pulled directly into the conflict, including the god Pharaoh himself was believed to be a son of. The 7th plague is hail mixed with fire, ravaging crops and killing anyone left outside. This targets the sky deities. Nut, the goddess of the sky, whose body was said to arch over the earth, and Set, the god of storms and chaos. It also strikes against Osiris, the god of vegetation and agriculture, by destroying the flax and barley. Exodus 9:31. Egyptian religion had specific deities tasked with sky weather and agricultural protection. None of them intervened. Pharaoh himself in Exodus 9:27 briefly admits, "I have sinned this time. The Lord is in the right, and I and my people are in the wrong." It's the first real crack in Pharaoh's defiance. The 8th plague brings locusts that eat whatever the hail spared. Egyptian agricultural deities, Min, associated with fertility and crops, and Renenutet, a harvest goddess, were specifically tasked with protecting the food supply. Various other lesser deities, including a figure sometimes identified as Senahem, were invoked against insect infestations, all of them now publicly useless. Exodus 10:15 says, "Not a green thing remained, neither tree nor plant of the field." Pharaoh's own officials in 10:7 plead with him, "Do you not yet understand that Egypt is ruined? Even his inner circle is breaking." The 9th plague is, by widespread scholarly agreement, the clearest God-targeted plague in the entire sequence. 3 days of darkness so thick that they could not see one another, nor did anyone rise from his place. Exodus 10:23. Ra was the supreme deity of the Egyptian pantheon, the sun god, source of life, the deity from whom Pharaoh himself was theologically descended. Ra was considered unstoppable. Ra had crossed the sky every day for thousands of years. Pharaoh's official title included Son of Ra, and for 3 days, Ra simply vanished. The Israelites in Goshen, meanwhile, had light in their dwellings. The most powerful god in Egyptian theology was eclipsed visibly, publicly, and selectively, while the people he was supposed to outrank kept the lights on. By any Egyptian theological standard, the argument was already over. But Yahweh doesn't stop at Ra. The final plague targets something even more specific: the one Egyptian deity who was alive, walking around, and giving orders. The 10th plague kills the firstborn of every Egyptian household, from Pharaoh's son down to the cattle. Pharaoh, in Egyptian religion, was not just a king, he was considered a living god, specifically the incarnation of Horus on earth and the son of Ra. His firstborn son was the next divine king in line. So when Exodus 12:29 records the death of the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on his throne, the divine succession of Egypt is severed in a single night. The god king's god heir is gone. Every household lost their firstborn, religiously and culturally the most significant member of the family. The Israelites, meanwhile, were marked with the blood of the Passover lamb and were passed over entirely. The dynasty of divine kingship cracked at its core. When you map all 10 plagues against the Egyptian pantheon, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. The Nile god, the fertility goddess, the earth god, the cattle gods, the healing deities, the sky gods, the agricultural gods, the sun god, and finally the god king himself. Every major theological category of Egyptian religion was systematically engaged and defeated. Exodus 12:12 wasn't a poetic flourish, it was a literal description of what was happening. Yahweh wasn't just rescuing a people, he was filing a public point-by-point judgment against the gods of the empire holding them, and in 10 coordinated moves he proved his case.